7, 6, 5.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Starboard Portal. My name is Betsy Allison. I'm the Director of Adult Programs at US Sailing, and today I'm joined by some amazing panelists that are going to talk to us about restarting existing adaptive programming in a COVID-19 environment. We have a great group of experienced adaptive sailing programmers and one of our blind sailors on with us today, and they're going to share their plans for restarting programs for people with disabilities, and there's definitely going to be time for Q&A. So if you have questions during the time the panelists are presenting, please type them into the chat box and we'll make sure to address them as we go along. Some of the things we're going to talk about today are the challenges that organizations face and how they are assessing, modifying, and mitigating issues related to sailing programs by changing procedures, policies, and approaches to sailing in these challenging times. So today we're joined by Spencer Raggio, who is the Director of Adaptive Sailing Programs at Why Not from upstate New York at Lake George. He is also the chair of our Parasailing Committee at US Sailing. Then we're joined from the West Coast by Chris Naughton. He runs the Bay Area Association of Disabled Sailors, the Badz program in San Francisco Bay. It is a program that has a lot of very high-level disability sailors sailing in the program and is a total volunteer-driven organization. We also have with us today from Boston, Andrew Altag. He's from Community Boating Inc. in Boston, Mass. He works with not only regular programming, but adaptive programming at community boating. And he's also very involved with blind sailing teams in the Boston area. So Andrew's going to talk to us a little bit about his roles in both of those capacities. And then we've got Pauline Dowell. She is a sailor from Boston Blind Sailing, Inc. She is a internationally known female blind sailor who has taken on the world not only in fleet racing, but in blind match racing as well. Pauline is going to be sharing with us some of her perspectives as a sailor with a disability and a challenge, and some of her concerns in coming back to the sport during the COVID times. So we're going to kick off with Spencer Raggio. Spencer's going to talk to us a little bit about Why Not and some of the things that they've been doing and considering in his program. To you, Spencer.
Thanks, Betsy. I think as everyone knows, New York started off as kind of the epicenter of this whole COVID-19 episode. And even though we're in upstate New York, we're about a 3-hour drive from New York City, but we're still under the same rules, regulations, restrictions as the rest of the state. So right now, we're currently in what's called phase 3 here, which allows for limited restaurant, outdoor dining, limited capacity restaurant usage. But what it does not allow for is recreation, which is a phase 4 thing, and sailing clearly falls under that category. The program that I'm with is Why Not Sailing. We're a program of the Capital District YMCA. We're located at on the grounds at YMCA Camp Gingerhook on Lake George, upstate New York. And while the YMCA has started to open in limited fashion for some of their suburban branches, what they call their swim and gym branches, we, as an overnight resident summer camp, we are not not allowed to open, and B, the Y itself has made the decision that the camp will not be operating at all this summer. So that obviously puts some severe restrictions on us too, in the sense that the entire staff of the camp has been furloughed. We're down to essentially three employees at the moment: the executive director, the main maintenance director, and an office manager to answer the phones and steer things around. So Why Not is primarily a volunteer-driven program, but we also do, of course, rely on staff for certain things. One of those things being powerboat operation, chase boat, functions during a typical sailing event. So we've been in discussions with the camp. There is definitely a strong effort on the part of the camp to make this happen in some way, shape, or form this summer. Even though the camp itself is not running, everybody seems to be in agreement that we can offer some type of sailing experience for sailors if we look at trying to keep everybody safe, maintain distancing, appropriate equipment, et cetera. So we're actually having a couple of meetings later on this week to see where we stand, as we're hoping that the phase 4 designation will happen at the end of the month on July 1. So we're kind of still in a little bit of flux right now. We have a lot of anxious volunteers who are just looking forward to getting out on the water. We have a lot of sailors also looking forward to getting out on the water. But some of the things that we're looking at are we run Martin 16s, which is a 2-person boat, and we also have sonars, typically 3 or 4 people on the boat. So at this point, we've made a decision not to run the sonars, just because it'll be less of a hassle in terms of the launching. We don't need it those need to be hoist launched as a fixed keel boat. The Martins we can ramp launch, but we can do that very easily ourselves. And we can also have people who are able to sail on their own, go out on the water on their own, which would again limit the exposure to primarily dock related activities, getting on the boat, getting off the boat. And then we're also looking at the fact that because we're a freshwater lake, we're not allowed to use any kind of cleaning products on boats that are in the water. So we can't scrub everything down with bleach at the end of the day, because we'd have to literally pull the boats out, do that on shore, and then relaunch them again. But with 6 Martin 16s in our fleet, we're pretty confident that we can basically send 6 boats out, and then let the boats sit for typically almost a week. We'll typically do our programs just on the weekends, and then by the end of that week, they've been untouched for 7 days, and anything remaining hopefully has been washed away by the wind and the weather at that point. So the biggest issue. I have
a quick question for you, though.
Sure.
With regard, since you are primarily volunteer driven on weekends, have you had a lot of concerns in lining up volunteers, or are your volunteers eager to get back out on the water? And what kind of communication have you had with them as far as COVID-19 and risks that may be associated?
Yeah, we've had, people have been very interested in getting back out on the water. And one of the reasons is that even though we're again in New York, upstate New York has been a very, very different story than New York City, Long Island, Westchester County, that area. In the last 3 weeks, we've had new cases in the single digits, 2, 3, 5 people in all the counties up here. So even though everybody is abiding by the same regulations, we're wearing masks when we go into grocery stores, we have the same distance requirements at restaurants. The prevalence of active cases, hospitalizations, all of those numbers are very, very, very low up in this area. So that's contributed, I think, to people's willingness to get out there and help out and do what they can do. Again, as long as everybody's taking reasonable precautions on that front.
Excellent. Well, let's jump now to Chris Naughton from San Francisco. Chris, you guys locked down pretty early too in the Bay Area, and we've had lots of discussions ongoing since the early times here about some of the operational toolkits and things available to start planning to reopen. And so again, you have a lot of very high level disability sailors. You have some people that use joystick steering and require a lot of assistance to get in and out of boats. And I believe you're 100% volunteer, and you operate from a dock and a shed on one of the piers in San Francisco Bay. So you don't have a big facility to operate out of. What were some of the challenges that you've had, and how did you start your planning process to determine what the feasibility really was?
Thanks, Betsy. So yeah, Badz is on Pier 40 in San Francisco. And a lot of the major challenge is addressing fear and anxiety about getting back out on the water. So early on, our Commodore Kathy Pugh set up a committee of 6 people led by Charles Weinbar, and we started going through the different issues, and we made it a very methodical process where we first started out with analyzing where we were and where we wanted to go, and then we developed other documents, and I can share some of those with you. Share my desktop. And let's see here. So we came up with an assessment calculator that assessed where we were and how much we could change in our program to make it safe for people. And that's out of Johns Hopkins University. They have an assessment calculator. Then we did a risk assessment and modification and developed mitigation measures so that we could see what we could change, where we were, what we could modify, and what we could do to mitigate the problems. Then we came up with a roadmap, and this was modeled after the governor's roadmap of opening up again. It's a 4-phase roadmap. We finally came up with a return to play action plan, which is quite detailed, and we developed cleaning and disinfecting procedures. And then finally, we had the board pass a policy that says everyone will follow these procedures. So the documents, the assessment calculator, well, the risk assessment and modification, this is the one from Johns Hopkins. And you can go through your programs and assess where you are and determine in this first stage, we determined what mitigation changes we could make. And Badz came out as a moderate risk assessment. So we have moderate risks for our people. Then we decided on, we determined our risk score, and that came out as high because we have a lot of people who are very vulnerable with health issues. And finally, we came up with the overall score, which was low. So we had an overall score that was low, and then we went into developing the assessment calculator of what we could change in our program to make things safer. And this is also from Johns Hopkins, and you can find this on their site. And you go through their questions and see what's applicable to your program, and then come up with another score there. And you can start developing procedures from that point on what you can change. We came up with our roadmap, and let's see, the roadmap. And we have 2 major programs at Badz. We have a keelboat program and we have small boat program. And so we decided we'd open in phases, and we'd address keelboats first, because the small boats require a lot of close interaction of getting people out of their chairs and into the boats. So we focused on keelboats. We have some assumptions that COVID-19 is not going away. Individuals decide if they want to come back, and everyone needs to take responsibility. Like I said, there are 4 stages, from the first stage where no one was sailing to the 4th stage where everyone can sail again. That's after the medication is available and vaccines. Safety and preparedness. We have lower risk activities that we could implement. So what we decided to do in our first stage for a lower risk is to allow families who are sheltering in place together to sail, and only those people, so that we don't have mixing of different people. So on June 14th, we finally let some of our families sheltering in place sail. And with that, we have our cleaning and disinfecting guidelines. And they've practiced those guidelines, and we've come up with some different improvements on the procedures. Then stage 3 is where we invite others other than Badz skippers to come back to Badz. And stage 4, of course, is when everything, the vaccine and therapeutics have been developed. So we then came up with the return to play action plan and the cleaning and disinfecting guidelines. And the cleaning and disinfectant guidelines has a lot of information from the CDC, from Johns Hopkins, from the FDA, and from OSHA, and a lot of links that people can go out and find out on their own what the guidelines are. As we were developing this, we knew that if people didn't feel safe, they wouldn't come back. So we wanted to do everything we could to make people feel safe and to be doing what we need to be doing to keep the environment clean. So then at the end of this, we have a checklist for skippers before they go out. You want to make sure they've got a hand sanitizing area. They have hand sanitizer in the cockpit of the boats. They have a trash receptacle. The docks have their 6-foot increments. Social distancing notices are posted on the boats, and they are required to wear gloves while they're cleaning the boats. So the general rule for us is to clean and disinfect after sailing or working on a boat. So if you take the boat out, you clean it when you come back and you disinfect. And if the bosun is working on the boat, the bosun cleans and disinfects when he's finished, so that the next people to come along know that the boat is clean. We're also limiting right now to Sundays only. So that gives you the 7-day increment where the virus dies outside. And but we're still going to clean and disinfect so that everyone feels safe. So that's basically where we are. We have families going out, and hopefully next week we're going to allow other skippers and guests to go out on the keel boats. And later we'll address the small boat sailing, where we'll be getting people out of their chairs into their own boats, and there's very close proximity. So we're going to have people either bring someone to assist them to get into the boat, or let us know they need a volunteer, and we'll set up that volunteer with the PPE, the proper PPE, to allow the person to get out of the chair and into the boat and go sailing. So it's a phased approach.
Well, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm going to come back to you for some questions later on what the sailors are clamoring for themselves about getting back into the small boats and what some of their concerns have been. We're going to move over now to Boston, going from West Coast back to East Coast. And we're joined by Andrew Altag. And again, he's from Community Boating in Boston. So Andrew, tell us what's happening in Boston. We know the governor's still got you shut down pretty much, but how are things, the planning stages been going to return to play?
So basically we're in a phased opening plan, just like, Chris and Spencer are here. So we're currently in phase 2. The one thing that's kind of unique about Massachusetts though, is we were allowed to open in phase 1 for recreational boating. So basically it was May 25th, we were able to actually start our phase 1 of opening. So we focused primarily on paddle boards, kayaks, trying to get our heads around basically sanitizing and disinfecting all the gear that was appropriate to the Commonwealth laws for us. So now we're actually offering sailing, and we have for about a week now. Last week, we actually started piloting blind sailing. So it's a little bit tricky with social distancing, as you would guess. So the rules are pretty much just like they are in California, as well as New York. You have to be in the same household, or you have to maintain 6 feet of social distance in the boat. So what we've done is we've basically taken what is normally a fun team sport for blind sailing, and we've turned it into a single-handed sport where we have a guide who's actually in a power boat that trails behind the actual sailboat, and we have headsets that basically the guide's able to talk to the actual sailor. So it's working pretty well. We did a few appointments last week, so we're hoping to expand it this week. But so far we're open from Wednesday through Sunday for sailing. So we rolled out sailing for our other members, so we're kind of figuring it out as we go. There have been a lot of hurdles. Obviously, like contact tracing here is a really big thing. We have to maintain records of people coming in and outgoing in the facility. We have to obviously disinfect all the gear, life jackets, anything they touch. We have to keep a cleaning log every single hour of any touch surfaces that are not even the boats. So our rules here are a bit more prohibitive than they are in the rest of the country. But that being said, like we are actually about to enter in a couple weeks into phase 3. So hopefully the boating restrictions will loosen up a little bit in that. But as of right now, like we're still trying to figure out how to actually get people with physical disabilities into the boat safely. And there's been a lot of apprehension from some of the staff about what we can actually do to offer that with transfers and opening up more vessels. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
So it's fascinating. So you've been putting a single blind sailor in a sailboat and a coach in a safety boat. So that's a departure from how things are normally done, right?
Yeah, it's totally bizarre, but some of the things that are coming out of this are actually good practices that we never actually thought of. So, it's definitely teaching a lot more independence and self-sufficiency. So I really like it. I mean, I think this could actually be like the wave of the future. So,
oh, that's wild. So now we're going to jump to Pauline. Pauline, have you been part of, you're going to have to take yourself off mute, part of this single-handed sailing expedition at Community Boating? Oops. I don't know that I can unmute you.
Can you?
There you go. Now we got you.
So what was your question? I'm sorry, I got a little distracted.
I said, have you been part of this single-handed sailing with someone following you in a coach boat? Well, first of all, give people a little bit of background about you and your unique living circumstances too, because I think your story is quite fascinating about the Newport Bermuda race, the 35-footer that you own and live on, and give people a little bit of an idea of, your situation and how you have maneuvered through this COVID-19 environment and your desire to get back on the water sailing in blind sailing.
I have not, well, first of all, I'm a blind sailor. I've sailed in competitions, international and local competitions, blind competitions, as well as blind and disabled competitions, fleet races, blind match racing, actual able-bodied match racing, any kind of racing, I'm there. And I live on a 36.5-foot Beneteau here in Boston Harbor. And I've taken it out a couple of times with a sighted guide. And the way we do it on my boat is it gives us enough 6 feet of distance from each other to be able to hear the sighted guide and do what I need to do. The sighted guide will kind of dance around so that they're at least 6 feet apart, and we wear masks. It's kind of hard to hear when you're in the wind and you have a mask over your face, but it works out. And as far as Andrew's prototype of sailing, I haven't been involved with this yet because it's brand new and it's amazing. I did it last year or the year before at MIT with a sighted guide sailing next to me in a safety boat, and they were just yelling. There was no headsets. It was just screaming back and forth. So the headsets are a really big step, and I really appreciate it. I was on the tech dinghies at MIT learning how to single hand, and it's a great, you learn so much when you're not relying on a trimmer, when you feel how you're steering and how you're trimming really affects the boat. And my sighted guide that I often use, Grace Olson, was amazing and getting me to do things that were a little bit beyond how I feel safe. And she really challenged me, and I really feel like I made huge leaps in my ability to figure out what's what on a boat.
So how have you felt about getting back to sailing during these times? Obviously, people are very concerned about their physical health. They're concerned about contact with people. Has that made you hesitate about coming back to sailing?
Absolutely. I belong to Boston Blind Sailing, and I get their updates constantly about what's going on. Andrew sends out his updates, and it's really good to know where, like if you're feeling like I really want to get on the water, and they're not ready, it's very frustrating, but they've been very upfront, very transparent about what's going on. and using the headset seems like a really great solution. I'm very nervous because as a blind person, I don't go to grocery stores because there used to be somebody would be able to help me find things. They're not allowing that. And, they have arrows on the floor somewhere saying you can go up this aisle or down that aisle. I can't do that. So I don't go to grocery stores. I've basically been staying on my boat and having people drop off food and water. But I really would like to get back on the river at community boating. But I am a little nervous about, people say, or somebody in the call, they have things on the ground saying 6 feet apart. I don't know where that is, so I don't want to accidentally run into anybody, or your guide dog doesn't know how to read, doesn't know how to space you 6 feet apart from the next person. The guide dog's like, yeah, people here, it's really hard when you can't see those social distances. So I'm always a little bit nervous about being in a place where there will be groups of people that I don't know, people that I haven't been around. It's very nerve-wracking.
And I'm sure you've been talking to other sailors that are in a similar boat, so to speak. What have their concerns been?
Well, the blind sailors, mainly that, just in people who are more physically disabled, how do you get into a boat without some hands-on assistance? And I think that is making it a very difficult choice. Do I want to really risk my health to go do something fun? Overall it's fun, but for me it's practice, because I really like to get in a lot of practice every season, and this season has been cut so short. You just feel the extra pressure of wanting to be out on the water. And I honestly, I cannot speak to other disabilities, but I would think just for me, it's a very fearful endeavor. You don't know who you're going to run into. You don't, you can't see if somebody's sitting over there sniffling. You can maybe hear it a little bit, but there's like physical symptoms. You can look and say, yeah, I want to stay away from that guy. But there's a lot of visual cues that you can see. There's somebody not wearing a mask. I prefer to wear a mask whenever I'm out. So it's really hard. It's really scary.
So here's an open question to the panel. With those of you who have started easing back in sailing, and having people show up, whether it's for kayaking, whether it's for blind sailing, whether it's just getting families back out on the water, what types of information are you collecting from them? Are you having people take their temperature for several days before they come? Are you checking that before they come? What types of screening, I guess, are you doing in your various programs? Or if you haven't started doing programming yet, what are you looking at to implement? Anybody have any thoughts?
Yeah, here at Badz, we have a new waiver that we're having people sign, which includes the risks of COVID-19 as well as the risks of sailing. And we're having our people sign that each time they go out, rather than once a year like we normally would. So that information, we're learning a lot because we just started going out 2 weeks ago. And regarding disinfecting, in the beginning of this pandemic, everyone was very fearful, and still are, that we could get things contaminated from surfaces. And now we're finding out that it's less likely to be contaminated from the surfaces, and it's more from people speaking and the aerosols. And so we're sharing that information with everyone who's going out sailing.
What about you guys, Andrew?
Yeah, so what we're doing is basically very similar to what Badz is doing. So we don't have drop-in sailing or kayaking. It is, you sign up ahead of time via reservation. So basically you have to go through a waiver online to actually fill out your reservation, get yourself set, and it gives you the whole self-check checklist We require everybody to give us their names and their phone numbers and also addresses for contact tracing. And we also make sure that we have times they're in and out of the building. We also obviously offer a refund fully if anybody has any symptoms whatsoever, no questions asked, just so they don't actually like try and push it and come down to the boathouse, because no one wants that.
Exactly. What about you guys, Spencer?
Well, we normally, in the pre-COVID era, because we're a part of the YMCA, we have people do sign waivers. We do a full background check on all volunteers as a matter of routine. So we're looking at basically essentially adapting our waiver, looking at what people, let's say, like what Chris is doing in San Francisco, seeing what we can add to that to provide some protection. But I think the insurance question is another one that I want to bring up here too, because at the YMCA, at the camp, we've knocked our insurance down to bare minimum because we only have 3 employees and we're not running programs. So right now we're looking into what kind of a sort of modified policy we can enable or extend to cover. Why not? For example, if we decide to run a smaller version of our program and we're the only thing running at the camp. And I know over at the Claggett Regatta, which is in Newport, another group I'm involved with, we had hopes of running the regatta in the fall in September, until we got the guidelines / requirements from the insurance company that basically made it pretty clear that there was no way we could run an event like that, meet those guidelines, and essentially be protected if there was some kind of an issue at the event. So I think the insurance aspect of it has been a key element, at least for the programs that I've been involved in.
Have you been able to get coverage for COVID-19, or is that, I mean, we've heard a lot on our end that the concern is that because it's a pandemic, that it's an act of God, that it's outside of the control of an organization, that many insurance companies are not covering for COVID related. Have you guys found anything that has or has helped you mitigate some of those concerns?
So with Badz, we have not. We did receive a notice from our insurance company that, and I don't remember the exact wording, but biological agents will not be covered. So we haven't started investigating yet what we can do for insurance.
Right.
We're currently in the process of renewing our insurance policy, but I don't think we're actually going to change from the normal sailing school policy that we actually have right now. So it seems to cover as much as is possible.
I think people have to be really mindful that in a return to play, I kind of think about it in these terms. Every time we go sailing, one of the highest risk things we do is the possibility that we get hit in the head with a boom. We could contract a cold or a virus from somebody on board the boat. There are always risks associated with everything that we do. And we have some questions coming in that I'll ask in just a second. So let me ask you, this, Chris, because you've been in close contact with all of your sailors, and yes, you're doing family sailing now. What are some of the concerns that you're hearing from the sailors about getting into small boats, or are they willing to accept those personal risks to get back out on the water? What are the conversations been with regard to that? So
because we're asking people to bring someone to help them get in the boat, for example, a family member, rather than a volunteer, people seem okay with that. But there are people who don't have anyone that they can bring. So we said, let us know in advance and we'll ask a volunteer if they're willing to help you with the PPE, with the masks, with the shields, with the gloves, and keep it to under 10 minutes from chair to boat so that you're not exposed to each other for a very long period at all. And you've got all the equipment, the PPE on to keep you safe. The guidelines say that if you can't social distance of 6 feet or more, that you need to wear a mask. And so that's what we're going to be doing, is wearing all the PPE we can. And we have a lot of cleaning equipment too. We've got sanitizers, we've got hand lotion, hand sanitizer, wipes. We have a disinfectant that we purchased from, I believe it's somewhere in Madison, Wisconsin, or somewhere else in Wisconsin, that is marine safe. And you can use it on the boat, spray it down, and it takes 10 minutes, wipe it down a little bit. You do not have to rinse it, and it kills the COVID or the coronavirus. So we're sharing that information with the people, and they seem to be accepting that we're doing the right things.
Great. Here's a question that has come in from Dave Schaefer. Sorry. Do you have temperature checks before entering the boats or before letting a sailor, coach, or sailor get on board? Anybody doing temperature checks in your programs?
We are not.
Not yet, but we plan to. When we have people coming from the outside, we're going to be checking their temperatures, and we're also asking their health history, like as if you were entering a hospital, if you've been exposed, if you've been sick, etc.
So when they show up, are you asking them questions like, have you had a fever lately? Have you been feeling well? You know, there obviously we've all seen lists of questions that have been posted in guidelines, state, local. Are you guys asking those questions or asking them to self-check and report into you as they turn up to your programs?
We are. So that's part of the waiver before they even come down. And they also need to notify us if anything comes awry, I guess, if they have to come down with fever in the next 2 weeks. But the thing about the temperature checks that we didn't really feel like it was completely necessary was, well, you would have to get a little bit closer to somebody, which we definitely don't want our staff doing. But also there's a ton of people who are asymptomatic that aren't actually going to have a fever. So really, we're not doctors. So self-checks for us are the best thing to do.
Okay, Spencer, I'm going to ask you this question. We have a question in from Alan Test. And this is sort of a general programmatic thing, okay? In these days of safe sport and, athlete safety, sailor safety on the water, Alan asks, what kind of background checks do you do on volunteers? His club doesn't think it important even for those volunteering with minors. What kind of thoughts do you have on that? We'll start with you, Spencer. What is your feeling on this?
Well, we, even though we're a camp for children primarily, the Why Not program is mostly adults. So we're dealing on a day-to-day basis during normal operation with other adult sailors. I think our youngest sailor might be a teenager at this point. But we're obviously also around kids, all day long because they're running around the camp doing, other activities in the midst of our sailing program. So the Y takes that very seriously. We use a third party. I think it's Volunteer Matters, I believe, is the organization where you can set up a registration account. You can you basically go through, you fill out some forms online. They do a background check to make sure that you don't have any, black marks in your history. That then becomes the good thing about that particular program, Volunteer Matters, is that for example, when I volunteered with a second unrelated sailing, not even sailing related organization later on, I already had an account. I'd already been checked out, and basically I got the approval essentially instantaneously because my green light was already on record there. So we have all our volunteers go through that process to basically set foot on the property and help out. And on the health side, we do basically a rough medical waiver type form, but again, we haven't started operations yet this year, so I'm not really sure what we'll do, if it will involve temperature checks or most likely we'll be asking people about history and past history and what they've been in contact with lately.
Chris, what about you guys and volunteers? I mean, obviously you're a very volunteer-driven organization. What about background checks for your people or some kind of safety training?
So the Badz board is currently evaluating which direction we're going to go with safe sport. A couple of us have taken the training, and we want to develop our own safe sport document because we have very few kids that come through our program, but we do have some. And so we're currently evaluating who will need to have background checks and who needs to have the safe sport training.
Well, I think it's really important to consider. I know a lot of times people associate safe sport training with youth sailing or youth sports, but many of us with adaptive sailing programs and inclusive sailing programs work with vulnerable populations of people. Some have intellectual disabilities, some physical disabilities and whatnot. And the safe sport training, which is free to any US sailing member, gives you that background on how to identify abusive relationships. Sometimes it's physical abuse, sometimes it might be emotional abuse, or sometimes it's something intellectual or bullying or whatever. So I think the safe sport training can be a very powerful education tool. I think one of the biggest challenges is people think, well, I'm not an abuser. I don't abuse people. It makes them, they think that they're being asked to take it because they're suspect. But when in fact, all it is teaching them how to identify situations that may not be appropriate when working with children or vulnerable populations. So I'm a big fan of that. And I think we're starting to work with organizations, and you and I can have a conversation about this too, how we can do a organizational membership for Badz so that we can work safe sport training into that for your people. But what about you guys? Andrew, do you guys background check?
We background check everyone from the top to the bottom, including my boss. So basically, if you come in contact with any of our members and you're a staff member, you are background checked. We don't actually have volunteers really in our junior program. That's kind of a kids only safe zone. It's no adults allowed on the dock that are not staff. So everyone there is 100% background checked. If we have any volunteers for our accessible program, we also do background check them. The only exception with volunteers is if you're just teaching one of our classes as an adult, right? You're not background checked in that case. But that's because, you're in a highly visible area, you're not alone with people, and they're not coming in contact with minors. So, well,
great. Thank you for sharing that, because I think that is a concern for a lot of people, and what they should do, especially if they're sailing, working with adaptive populations, and what kind of action they should take. Here's a question from Bob Johnstone of the J-Boat fame. Why not adaptive racing programs using radio control boats? If you can't get them out on the water in a physical sailboat, has anybody thought about using the DF95s or other remote controlled, radio controlled boats? Just throwing that out there. It's a question that's come into our inbox.
So that's not. Go ahead, Andrew.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, in Massachusetts, you're basically not supposed to be congregating on the dock. It's supposed to be used for transit. So we really have not explored that. We do have a fleet of robotically sailed boats, but it hasn't been something that we've considered yet.
It's a good concept though, right? Especially even if you have wheelchair users that use joysticks, now they're probably better. They'd be better at it than we would. Yeah. I'm terrible at any kind of video game. So here's another question coming from Laurel Johnson. How have you been cleaning your PFDs, life jackets, lines, and other soft surfaces? Hard surfaces are one thing. What about the lines? What about life jackets? And what should you do, or what have you considered?
So I can go first unless somebody else wants to.
No, go ahead, Andrew.
Okay. We've been using a diluted bleach solution for our life jackets. And basically what we do is we've got kind of a big boiler room that has an in-ground sink. So we have a huge catch basin that has the diluted bleach in it. We put the life jackets in there, sanitize them, or sterilize, disinfect, whatever the correct term is. I think it's disinfect. And then we take them and then we rinse them over a huge catch basin. So we catch all the actual water and bleach that's coming off it so it doesn't go back into the river. Then we hang them up to actually dry them. So we can cycle through multiple batches per day doing that, which is actually pretty beneficial. And then we just take the huge cart that has the buckets attached to it to our in-ground sink that goes straight into the sewage and dump it there every night. But it's really important if you're actually going to do that. Remember, you're not supposed to actually have bleach solution out for more than 24 hours. So if you do that, definitely change it every single day. What we're doing as far as our boats go, we actually have 2 different sort of disinfecting agents that we're using right now. They're both on the EPA list N. So if you look at that, you'll find like a variety of them from like 30-second wet time, if you can find it, which is pretty impossible to find because it's all sold out, all the way up to like 10 or 20 minutes. So we're using the 10-minute wet time and kind of an enclosed ventilated tent for kayaks and other sort of smaller boats like stand-up paddleboards. For our sailboats, what we're doing is we're using what's called Oxiver 16. So it has a 5-minute wet time, and we're basically soaking the line, and then we're doing that on every single thing. We use basically a pump sprayer for it. So you get full coverage on it. Just make sure you get one that has like a fan spray because that covers a lot of ground really quickly. Some of the considerations though, when you're looking at that is the actual heat, right? We're doing this in the summer. Things evaporate really quickly under the sun. And unless you have a giant shaded area, it dries really quickly. And the wet time means it needs to stay wet with that disinfectant the entire time recommended, right? So if it looks like it's starting to dry, you have to go back over it and make sure it's wetted. So.
What about you guys, Chris? What about the lines? Are you soaking them in a bleach soap solution, or what are you doing for those soft surfaces?
So depending on the timeline, if it's 7 days, if the equipment hasn't been used in 7 days or more, we simply clean with our regular boat soap. If it needs disinfecting, we use a sprayer that we found online at the U.S. Leadership Forum Facebook page called the Hudson sprayer. And that's also where we found this disinfectant, which is safe for non-porous surfaces, for soft surfaces. So we can spray that on the lines, on the rigging, on the cushions, and it will disinfect. So we haven't had a lot of experience with that yet. We're just opened on the 14th, but that's our plan.
Great. And any thoughts on that, Spencer?
Yeah, we're in a different situation here because, as I mentioned, Lake George is drinking water for a lot of people. There are a lot of houses on the lake that literally have a hose that runs into the bottom of the lake, and that's where they suck in their water supply. So we've got a whole alphabet soup of agency acronyms that would come down on you like a ton of bricks if you did anything on the water or near the water. So really, when we're looking at even cleaning the boats in the water during a normal season, we can use a pressure washer with just water only. And that's typically what we would do. But right now we're going to rely on the 7-day rule. That said, as Chris mentioned earlier, it appears that the transmission is not really surface related or not heavily surface related, and it's more person related. So we think that by using the boats, let's say on a Sunday, and then coming back and using them again on the next Sunday, we're covered and we're safe in that regard.
So Pauline, here's another question for you. As a sailor, when you when you're going to show up at a sailing training session, whether it's with a sighted guide or when things open up a little bit more, what are some of the things that you plan on doing with your own gear to protect yourself? I mean, in terms of gloves, your own life jacket, equipment and whatnot. What are some of the considerations that you're thinking about personally?
Wearing PPE, my life jacket, no one else is going to be using but me. It'll only be touched by me. I hopefully won't be close enough to anybody to get any aerosol body fluids. So I'm not going to worry about that. I really have been listening to what Andrew has to say about his safety procedures and how they're maintaining their boats and training their staff. And that to me is more important than what I bring to it. I'm afraid to go into situations where they take it in a very lax manner. They're not wearing face masks. They're not understanding how important it is for social distancing or for disinfecting. They have so many protocols, and for Massachusetts, they have a lot of criteria they need to meet to open up to the greater public. And Andrew seems to be taking it very seriously. And to me, that means a lot more than me schlepping over there with my own PPE and safety vest. So, yeah, I really want to. If I'm going to a place like CBI that I've been to a million times, it's nice to know that they're taking this very seriously. But if I were invited to another place, I would do some homework and ask questions, call them up, say, what are you doing for this? And how are you cleaning your boats and cleaning your soft surfaces? That's what's important to me.
That's great. I think that that's really important too, because it does address the other side of the coin. You know, sometimes we with programs think we've got the best, you know, procedures in place, but if the confidence isn't there from our clients and from our sailors that are coming down to utilize our boats and our facilities, you know, one bad experience could have a negative impact on what we're trying to achieve. On the gear that you're asking people to come wearing or using, obviously, Andrew, you talked about CBI provided life jackets for people and how you're sanitizing them. Are any of you in your programs asking people to wear full-fingered gloves? Are you asking them to wear face masks? Are neck gaiters acceptable? You know, the buff style face coverings? Are you asking them to wear sunglasses for eye protection? What are you asking of them, and what are you able to provide your sailors with?
So for us here in Boston, basically to make sure that we actually stay within the Commonwealth regulations, you must be wearing a face covering all the time. Buffs are okay. Once you're off the dock, you can take it off, but before you return to the dock, it has to be back on. Before you enter the facility, you have to clean your hands. Upon exiting, you have to clean your hands. As far as gloves and other PPE, I mean, people are more than welcome to bring that. We don't really advertise that much because we're going to disinfect the boat regardless. Each boat must be disinfected after each use. So it doesn't really make a big difference to us whether or not somebody actually wears gloves or not. So basically, the only thing they're mandated to wear is a face covering of some sort.
Got it. What about you guys, Chris?
So we're allowing people to remove their masks after they leave the harbor. Like Andrew, they have to have their masks on the boat and at the dock. So far, we're only requiring people to use gloves when they're disinfecting or using cleaning materials. And those are the plastic gloves. We have not considered asking them to use the full-fingered sailing gloves yet. But it's all evolving, and we'll update these documents as we learn more from people like here. Sure.
What about you guys, Spencer? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously masks would be critical for us, I think, and you know, some kind of face covering, certainly on the dock. If somebody is leaving the dock on their own, and they're, you know, single-handing a boat, or they're with a family member or an aide, or, you know, somebody that they've been quarantining with, then obviously they can take the masks off once they leave the dock. As far as gloves, I haven't really seen much in the way of the efficacy of those. And, you know, you wear a glove, you touch your face, you cough into your hand or whatever, and, you know, the glove is no different than your hand in that regard. So, I think it makes sense to do it while you're cleaning, perhaps, but as a general rule, probably not.
All right. Well, we have no questions coming in. So what I'm just going to do, Spencer, in the last few minutes that we have, what we're really excited about is adaptive sailing as a whole. And a lot of clubs and organizations may be a little tentative about starting an adaptive sailing program, about how to get started, what they can do. We do at US Sailing have an adaptive instructor workshop, which is open. If you are a level 1 or a basic keelboat instructor, you can get an endorsement to your certification, or you can audit it. If you've got volunteers that want to get more experience in working with people with different disabilities, that's a great workshop to take for personal development or for an instructor endorsement. But I mentioned earlier in the call that Spencer is the chair of our para sailing committee, and there is a lot of information and resources that are available on the US Sailing website, on the Claggett website, about some easy adaptations for boats. And what I do want to just say to everybody is, start where you feel the most comfortable. You know, when listening to Pauline, you know, a blind sailor needs somebody to help give direction and talk through situations. They're perfectly physically capable of sailing a boat on their own through audio, you know, radio communication, or with some guidance from a sighted guide. It's a very easy way to get involved with adaptive sailing. Some populations require some adaptations to boats, but you don't necessarily need specialized boats that are built for people with disabilities. Quite often, there are very simple modifications that can be made to get people on a 35-foot cruising boat or a sonar or even a flying Scot or some other type of stable platform. So Spencer's going to pull up his screen in a second and is going to show you where on the US Sailing website you can find some information. And if you are interested at all in starting an adaptive sailing program at your organization, please reach out to either me, Betsy Allison at ussailing.org, at adaptive@ussailing.org, or any of us, Spencer or any of the rest of us, but you can always find us through the website. So Spencer, I'm turning it over to you.
Okay. There are, as Betsy mentioned, a lot of good options on the, a lot of good information, I should say, on the, oh, you know what? I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to do this, Betsy. My permissions aren't set up to share here. So are you able to pull that up on your screen?
I'll have to go into my little thing first. So why don't you talk a little bit about getting started with the adaptive sailing program and the easy steps there, and I'll find the pin.
Sure.
In the meantime.
So the in terms of getting started, as I mentioned, there are a lot of good options, good information on the US Sailing site. It's a great place to start, going to the main adaptive sailing webpage on that site. And then within there, you'll find not only locations of places to sail, but also the adaptive sailing resource guide, which is available for download, which has a ton of information in there. And is primarily the textbook for for the adaptive workshop program that Betsy mentioned earlier in the discussion. The other two locations or links that you'll find on there, one is to the Claggett Regatta website, where we've been putting together an adaptive resources guide as well, and a website called adaptiveSailingEquipment.com, which is sort of a comprehensive Wikipedia-like resource for various boat adaptations, both for steering adaptations, seating, and various other miscellaneous adaptations.
Can you see the page now on my screen?
I can, yeah, thank you.
Okay, here's the page. It's actually, you can get in there from hovering over education, and you just come over to adaptive sailing and scroll through. And then, as Spencer was mentioning, here's the adaptive sailing manual. You can actually download that as a free download. You can contact us here at adaptivesailing.org. And then how to become an adaptive instructor is there. Learn more about classification, connecting with programs and resources. And then there are typically events on the sailing calendar. And we definitely have an adaptive sailing instructor course on the calendar, South Beach Yacht Club, in August. That's exciting. That was a postponed course from earlier in the summer in June. We've got the Independence Cup, which is still on task in Chicago. If you have sailors that are interested, the Claggett has been postponed to 2021. So we typically have events that are on this resource page, but we're very excited to have you all be part of this. We thank you for joining us today. Please know that every live show on the Starboard Portal is recorded. So if you have friends or family or other people that haven't been able to be with us today, please let them know that this has been recorded. And this has all been made possible through people like you who are joining or renewing their US Sailing membership. So if you're not a current member of US Sailing, please just come to our pages, click join or renew today, and we can keep these resources coming to you as we go forward. So on that note, I really want to thank all of our presenters today, Spencer, Chris, Andrew, and Pauline, for being part of this presentation. You know, you guys are what makes it worthwhile being out there and sailing on the water, and you inspire us to do better things through the sport of sailing. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. We certainly appreciate it, and we hope to see you next time. So again, join or renew your US Sailing membership today. And if you can, get your adaptive sailors out on the water and think about the protocol, because the Leadership Forum Facebook page is sharing a lot of these great resources that Chris and Andrew and Spencer have been talking about. So again, on that note, have a great afternoon and join us again on the Starboard Portal. This is Betsy Allison for US Sailing.